The concept phase. So for my sketches, basically what I do is to start with 3D. I want to make sure that everything is correct, and that starts with a human. So I import a dummy with real world measurement. When I do start an environment, I always start with the ground. It's important for me to start to build it from the ground up. When I look at my scene, I'm starting with cubes. Cubes or very simple geometric shapes. I'm basically trying to find the perspective. Once I have the shapes in place, later on, that will actually help me to find the perspective in 2D when I will actually start to draw on it. I'm using the 3D to help me define my perspective guideline. Doing this step in 3D will allow me to find good camera angles. It is like going on location and looking through a camera that actually has a lens. This will allow me also to make better choices based on quote-unquote physical parameters. What I'm doing for the background buildings, it's the same principle, you know. I'm trying to find the perspective that those buildings in the background will actually have. So I'm giving them a bit of volumes to help me trust the perspective. Now that I have my camera in the shot, I can visualize it better. I can make my angles more accurate. I can explore. And with these in the scene, I can make my call on the chosen angle that I wish to keep in the end. I am now using a surface shader and changing its color to white. I'm doing this so when I render with the tune feature from V-Ray, I can only see the black lines, just like you see right now on the screen. It will mimic ink on Canva. So basically, once I'm finished with the renders, I will be able to use all that, bring it into Sketchbook. This is now available to me as a starting point for my drawing, for my different sketches that I want. And I can also render different angles, and I can now render something quick, have several angles rendered, and I'll be able to choose from there. Now that the render is done, I'm importing it back into Autodesk Sketchbook. And from there, I'm tracing the perspective. That's why I modeled the cubes in Maya initially, so I could have a strong foundation for the perspective. Once I have my perspective traced, then I can start to draw the elements on it. I usually try to build my sketches the same way I would build it in 3D. But you know, sometimes I just jump around, depends on what I feel. This is a lot about exploration, so I try to limit the mechanical aspect of it. For example, I started with the foreground here. I'm trying to make this as flawless as possible. One thing also, when I start painting or during the entire process, I had on another monitor that unfortunately you can't see here, but on my second monitor, I had all the references from what we see from the previous chapter. They're always with me, so I can always refer to it at any time. It is very important because you will be asked during production, during the work, you'll be asked to match or to stay as close as possible from the reference that they give you. Unless they tell you you can take some liberties, but you should always stick to what they tell you to do. And that's why I built the concept in the beginning, so I could have a solid base to start from, and then as I do the work, then this will always be with me. It is like the blueprint from the entire shot. This is what I'm going to follow, and that's the concept and the reference that we gathered. So once I have the base for the ground, I start establishing the walls. Same principle here, you know, building it from the ground up. This might sound pretty obvious, but many times you would be surprised why your piece will be weak. In an environment, it is very important, and that goes from concept until the end. By the end, I mean compositing your shot and projecting it in 3D. Everything is being held from the ground. Like, we exist because there's a ground, right? We're not airborne creatures, so everything we build is from the ground. It is the same when I build an environment, or for that matter, any artist. The ground is your base. It is your foundation. You cannot build anything if you don't have something to stand on. So I remember when I was a student, teacher was pointing it out every time. Your environment is weak because you do not have a ground. I also studied comic books before joining the visual effects industry, and every time, in many occasions, the shots were weak. They were saying your environment is wrong. There's no ground. So I cannot stress enough, start from the ground. You will always have a good foundation, a good base if you start from the ground. Also, for example, when you project anything in compositing for your matte painting projection, even though you have a mountain with a bit of a ground, or anything that has a bit of a ground, if you only project it on a plane that's 90-degree angle from the floor, it will be wrong. So you will have to put a ground to project it on, even though. And that is a mistake that you can find often, where you're like, why is that shot looking a bit weird? We don't really know why. Well, it's because you did not project it on the ground, for example. That is one of the examples that you can find. Well, now that might sound a bit excessive, but you would be surprised how many times I've seen pieces work, or people doing their work, and they do not have a ground, or they have a weak foundation. That's very important.